for some more fun math. I'm going to talk today about multiplication and division. To begin with, I'm going to write this on the board. I think everybody can figure out what that's equal to. If we add 3 plus 3 plus 3 and we do that 5 times, we get 15. Probably some mathematician, because they tend to be efficient, looked at that and said, there ought to be an easier way to do this. And so they said, oh, we've got 5 3s, and that's 15. Or in other words, 5 times 3 equals 15. If you just look at the amount of time and the room that it took to write that down, that's obviously a better way to do it. So aren't we glad that somebody figured out all of our timetables? Can you imagine what it would be like to do 11 times 12 if you had to do 12 plus 12 plus 12 plus 12 and do that 11 times? So we need to be grateful that somebody figured out the times tables, and now all we have to do is learn them. If you haven't given that some consideration, I would suggest it. Save yourself a whole lot of time rather than counting on your fingers the way I see students doing. It's just nice if you know what it is, and it isn't that much to learn. In fact, there are only like 21 distinct multiplications that you need to worry about to have your times tables for up through 12. So give it some thought. Now, there's some things about multiplication that you need to be aware of. Some vocabulary words. Numbers that we multiply together to get the result are called factors. In other words, 3 and 5 are factors of 15. 15 is called the product. Now, if you need some help remembering that, think about manufacturing. We take things and we put them together, and when we do, we end up with a product. Well, the factors are the things that go together to make the product. So if you kind of remember that, maybe you can that'll help you remember those words. But they're very important words in math, and they're words you're going to want to recognize right away, because a lot of times knowing those words will tell you what you need to do with a given problem. So it's beneficial. So make sure you get familiar with those words. Some other things that we need to know. If I go 4 times 3 or 3 times 4, I get the same result. And that's always true about multiplication. That's why I said there were only 21 different multiplication facts you have to know, because if you know 6 times 7, you already know 7 times 6, so you don't have to learn that again. So that's an important thing to remember. The name of this property is called a commutative property, and I'm not going to write it down, but maybe if you remember commuters, people who live in New England and actually work in New York, to get on a train on Monday morning, ride the train to New York, do their work, then they go back home to New England. Okay, they're not any different basically when they're going to New York or whether they're going home, so the difference or the direction they're going doesn't really make a difference. So maybe that'll help you remember that term, commutative property. Okay, and this is something we're going to use here, so keep that in mind. Another thing that's helpful, if I multiply 7 times 10, I get 70. 7 times 100, I get 700. 7 times 1,000, I get 7,000. Does anybody see a pattern developing there? Okay. Every time when you multiply a number that ends in 0, you get a corresponding 0 at the end of your number. So basically here you're multiplying 7 times 1 and adding the 0 on the end. Here you're multiplying 7 times 1 and adding 2 zeros on the end. Here you're multiplying 7 times 1 and adding 3 zeros on the end. So that's really important, and it's important because when you know it, it's going to help you do some things a little bit easier. So make a note of that, mental, or write it on a piece of paper where you can find it, because that's something that's going to be important to you. One other thing, and I'll have to erase this first before I can do this, that we need to know so that I can show you something really handy. If I multiply 5 times 4 plus 3, according to the order of operations, we do things in grouping symbols first. Grouping symbols are things like parentheses. And if you need some help remembering that, doesn't that kind of look like somebody put a fence around the 4 and the 3 and kind of separated them into a group? Well, that's kind of what it is. And if you look at this, you're multiplying 5 times the group. So you do what you're told to do with the 4 and 3. Somehow, they're special, we got to take care of them. So we get 4 plus 3 is 7, and then 5 times 7 is 35. Well, that's all well and good, except we're going to be talking about situations dealing with numbers that we don't know. This is 5 times some number plus 2. Unfortunately, we don't know what that number is. So we can't combine those. They're not the same. And that's one of the things you really need to know in math. We can only add things that are alike. Okay, so we had to come up with a different way to do that. Well, some bright person said, well, wait a minute. If I multiply the 5 times the 4, I get 20. And then multiply the 5 times the 3, I get 15, and I've got that add symbol there, and sure enough, 20 plus 15 is 35. Well, that meant we were able to do something with something like this where we couldn't combine them because they're not alike, but we can write it in a different form, and maybe that can help us do something else that we might not be able to do otherwise. This is called the distributive property. Now, if you need help remembering that, think about a food distribution company. What they do is companies call them and place an order for a certain kind of food. They put it in a truck. The driver comes in the morning and he goes around to every place on his route and drops off the food that he left. Now, he's got to go to every place that's on his route if they've ordered something. If they're part of the group that ordered something, he better go there. Because you know what would happen if he skipped somebody and didn't take them their food. Somebody's going to get a call, and they're not going to be happy, and somebody's going to be unhappy, and you might even lose your job. So you want to make sure, if you're a distributor, that you take it to every single place. Okay, so when we distribute multiplication through a group, we have to be sure and remember to multiply everything in the group. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at what we have here. I'm supposed to multiply this 5 times this group. So I'm going to multiply by everything in the group. First of all, I'm going to do the 5 times x. And this is how we write it. That means 5 times x. And then I'm going to write the 5 times 2 plus 5 times 2, which is 10. So 5 times that group with x plus 2 is equal to 5x plus 10. Okay, the distributive property. Make sure you multiply everything. And why do we care? Well, I'm going to show you how we can use that to our advantage. A bouncy screen here. I'm going to show you how you can multiply a couple of numbers in your head. You won't have to write it out on a piece of paper. If you learn what I showed you here, you'll be able to do it much easier. So our problem is going to be 50 times 35. How many of you think you can multiply that in your head? Well, if you can, then you probably know some of the things that I'm going to show you here. But if you don't, let's just do it and see what happens. I'm going to take this 35 and I'm going to make a group out of it. So now it's going to look like this. Now remember, I'm choosing to do this because I want this to be easy. So I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to multiply the 50 times the 30. Well, remember what we learned? If there's a 0 on the numbers, end of the numbers that are multiplying, they're going to end up on the end of our answer. So I've got 2 of them. So I write those 2 zeros down, and then all I have to worry about is 5 times 3, and I can handle that. So instead of having to worry about 50 times 30, I'm just doing 5 times 3, and I get 15. And so 50 times 30 is equal to 1,500. Now I'm going to multiply 5 times the 5. Well, there's another 0, so I'm going to have a 0 on the end of my number, and now I just have to multiply 5 times 5. No, it's not 10. 5 times 5 is 25. Now, I can do this in my head. I'm going to do part at a time. What's 1,500 plus 200? Right, 1,700. And then I've got the 50 that I needed to include in that, and so I get to 1,750. So by working with easy numbers, I can actually multiply in a simple way and get the answer that I need. Okay, now I'm going to show you one other thing about multiplication that is quite helpful, or it is for some people. If you're okay with what you've always done with multiplication, this might not be something you're interested in, and that's okay. This is just helpful for some people. If I want to multiply 723 times 7, now normally, if you know about multiplication, we multiply 7 times 3 and get 21. We put the 1 where it goes. The 2 is now a 10, so we carry it over here in the tens column. Then we go 7 times 2, which is actually 7 times 2 tens, or 14 tens, plus those 2 makes it 16 tens. Let me write that down here. And so that's 16 tens. We carry that 1 over here. 7 times 7 is 49, plus that one, and that gives us 50. And that's our number. Let me write this up here so it's there. Now that's the way a lot of us know how to do multiplication, but some people have trouble with that because they get the numbers so they're not quite lined up and it creates problems for them. So I'm going to show you another way you can do it, and it works, and it's good for some people. You just need to decide whether it's good for you. So let's start here. Same problem. Except now, I'm not going to, this takes a little more work, you need to know that, but it might help you keep it straight. So when I go 7 times 3, I'm just going to write down 21. Now this 7 times this 2, that 2, remember, represents 20. So when I go 7 times 20, I know I'm going to have a 0 on the end. And then 7 times 2 is 14. Over here, I'm going to multiply this 7 here is a 700. So I've got 2 zeros on the end. And then I multiply 7 times 7. Hopefully I know that, and so my answer is 4,900. And then I add them, and look at all the big numbers I have to add. 1 plus 0 plus 0, I can handle that. 2 plus 4 plus 0, I can handle that. 9 plus 1 is 10. So I'm going to carry the 1 over there, and I get exactly the same number that I did before. Only now, This number, or this way, I didn't have any problem getting my numbers lined up, so I have less chance of making a mistake. So that's something that you can use all of this stuff for. Take the time to go through and look at this video and review the video and look at the notes that are available to you so you can think about it, go through it until you've got your brain programmed that it knows how to do it. And maybe this will help you deal with some problems you've had in the past with multiplication, which is pretty important. I mean, if you're going to do some of the stuff we're going to be doing, you got to know how to multiply. So I hope this helps you. And next time we'll talk about division. Thank you very much.